people charged with speaking as I'm about to do often end by saying he or she will be missed. Some people even plop in a modifying word, such as sorely. He will be sorely missed. I'm not going to end this speech that way. About 3 o'clock in the morning, still sitting there trying to come up with exactly what it was I was going to say to you. Having been through many different iterations of this humble speech, I realized the one person who could really help me write it was Ilhan Mimaroglu. Ilhan was not there. You see, I became so used to putting my hand on the telephone and dialing 2222422 and having Ilhan pick up and solve any problem. Ilhan, what instrumentation should we use in this arrangement? Is it a flute, an oboe, or a violin? Oboe. Immediately, he knew what was there. Well, that was the way Ilhan always treated me, solving problems, doing things for me. I came here to go to school from Ohio. I come from a family of Turkish immigrants who settled in Ohio. They were mostly workers, certainly no one who had the education that Ilhan did. So when I came here, I sought him out. I had his name and an introduction. And I thought I was going to meet someone wearing a Brooks Brothers suit, sitting behind a huge, enormous mahogany desk. You can imagine how shocked I was instead when I found a man in khakis in an office with ashtrays filled to the brim and music scores all around and all sorts of electronic equipment and stray wires. Ilhan had a lot of stray wires, but he knew exactly what each one was for. I thought he somewhat resembled Fidel Castro. Still, as a recent graduate of the Juilliard School, I expected him to scrutinize my musical credentials and give me a job. Well, it didn't exactly happen like that. I was really unprepared for the roller coaster ride he was about to take me on. I'm still on that ride, Ilhan, and I'm so grateful. Thank you so much. Ultimately, it was Ilhan who introduced me to Nesuhi and Ahmet Ertegun. That resulted in my working for Warner Brothers Elektra Atlantic International as assistant to Nesuhi, which was one of the greatest times of my life. As Manfred Borman knows, we sat 2 offices apart for many years at Rockefeller Center. It was just a wonderful time to be with these wonderful, powerful Turkish people. We didn't have that kind of Turk in Ohio in those days. So, of course, today I feel an enormous loss. It's unthinkable that he should have died. I want to say, why did you do this, Ilhan? Over the years, while I was at WEA, Ilhan and I became very close friends. For my part, I would say he was nothing less than my best friend. He taught me how to argue, how to engage in intellectual pursuits based upon my views, albeit that some of my views were totally in contrast and contradictory to his. He loved intellectual discourse. He loved the argument, and he taught me to argue and to think and to argue. So all the time I was there, sitting at my desk at WEA, I had the Brooks Brothers suit, by the way. Ilhan was downstairs making records out of the music of Mingus, and Coltrane, and fantastic records they were. Pretty much any record that Ilhan had anything to do with would wind up being the critic's choice at Fanfare magazine or another magazine that was reviewing records. The same was true with the classical records that he made of Idil Beret and Meral Güneman, two brilliant pianists who were on the Finidar label. I remember working with Ilhan to put together liner notes and to put together packaging for the recordings of Idil and Meral. It was incredible how frugal and how minimalist he could be. We needed photographs sometimes, and Ilhan would bring out this tiny little old outdated camera with very few features on it, and I would be walking around with my latest Nikon, most expensive camera, and probably 2 or 3 cameras strapped to my shoulder, and Ilhan would say, "What do you need those for? What do you need?" I said, "Well, make this picture." She said, "I don't know, it's totally unnecessary." And of course, it was. Ilhan could do anything with a minimum of equipment, that's for sure. He once recorded Meral Güneman in the 92nd Street Y, and he asked me to come to the recording session, and I said, "Who's the engineer? And we need this equipment." We don't need that at all. He literally, and I forget which recording it was, he sat there with his Beta VCR on his lap and wires running into it from the stage, and he made an award-winning recording. Why do I know it was award-winning? Virtually all of the classical recordings he made with those two wonderful performers were singled out and given awards. So, as I said, we had a mutual hobby, which was photography. We spent days out on the streets with our cameras and on weekends making 8mm films. Ilhan taught me how to make films. He taught me how to use a camera. He didn't like my use of a zoom. He felt it was just perfectly fine to stand here and walk 20 feet ahead. He literally invented human zoom. But being together with Ilhan was wonderful, and it was all the more wonderful because we would go to Morningside Heights, right across the street from Columbia University, into their home, and I can't tell you the wonderful nights and weekends that we spent together. Their home was always open to all of the Turkish students. And I remember so well the times we had, and people like Isaac, Shabnam, Aisha, Meral, Murat. Selçuk was alive in those days, and Kaya was there. And we used to sit and talk and have the most wonderful conversations. It was such a vibrant environment. Ilhan always loved an intellectual challenge, and none was too great for him. We challenged him, he would challenge us back in the most direct way. Well, it has been a wonderful trip knowing Ilhan. Thank you so much.
Given the accomplishments of late Ilhan Bey and the lives he touched through his music, through his artistry, through his business, I'm at a loss of words. Having arrived in New York City about 6 months ago, I now realize what a loss it is for me personally not to have known him. His accomplishments stand on its own, and given the participation today at the solemn ceremony says it all. Madam, on behalf of the Consul General of the Republic of Turkey, and on my own behalf, please accept our most sincere condolences and sympathies.
Ilhan the Magnificent. My first reminiscence of the name Ilhan Mimaroglu was the voice on the radio, the program of jazz. This was music that otherwise was not easily found on radio dials in Istanbul in the 50s. Then we fast forward to the late 60s to New York City, and we're sharing an office at Atlantic Records, 1841 Broadway, working for Nesri Ertuğrul. We're in the album department. Albums, I would like to remind you, were vinyl, 12-inch by 12-inch, there were albums. We worked on all aspects of the production, printing, credits, label, copy, liner notes, and credits. Now, Nesri was a stickler for precise credits. You had to have the right musicians, instrumentation, and punctuation. Well, Ilhan was the same, and the two hit it off. Nesri, who otherwise was very much on hand on his own productions, entrusted his own productions to Ilhan, whether it was selecting of takes, mixing, supervising, mastering, and later on, actual producing some of the artists most close to him, like Mingus, modern jazz quartet. There was a mutual admiration between the two, based on mutual respect and affection. The rest of Atlantic took a while to figure out this strange Turk with the unpronounceable last name. But as they got to know him and warm up to him, they found out that he was and is a veritable bundle of knowledge of almost everything, not just every genre of music, of arts, literature, film, politics, well, maybe not sports. But he knew and he opined, and very articulate, and with irony. He had a keen sense of humor and loved puns. That he's a certified genius in the field of electronic music is, we all know it, but very few people really know much about that field. But those who knew, like, say, John Anderson, the lead singer of the supergroup Yes, he was a fan. When he came to New York, the first thing he asked Nesri was to be introduced to Ilhan. Fellini used Ilhan's music in the film Satirical. I heard that the artist Jean de Buffet knocked on Ilhan's door and had to do it a few times till he was let in to be introduced to him. In 1971, Atlantic released Ilhan's Sing Me a Song of Song Me. This was a fantasy for electronic music featuring Freddie Hubbard and his quintet, and it included reciters, chorus, string orchestra, Hammond organ, and processed sounds composed and realized by Ilhan, and based mostly on the poems of the Turkish poet Fazıl Hüsnü Dağlar. Threnody for Sharon Tate. What a good time for a Kent state. There he goes with the puns. Black soldier. And yet there could be love. It's not all dark. And there is a bit affirmation of life in Ilhan. Very life affirming. Then of course there's the creation of Filmada Records. This is a label that, in their great wisdom, the Ertuğruls, Nesri and Ahmet, both encouraged and supported Ilhan to run, and basically he ran it single-handedly. Filmada is a phenomenal label. It starts off with the release of Ilhan's Wings of the Delirious Demon, and here are some of the composers on this label. John Cage to Edgar Varese, Boulez to Berio. There's music for Schoenberg, Berg, Weber, Stockhausen, Hans Eisler, as well as Ives, Messiaen, Ravel, Stravinsky, Mahler, Schreib, and on and on. It featured performers like the pianist Idil Biret, Meral Güleyman, George Flynn, Frederick Rzewski, Doris Hayes, the violinist Karen Phillips, and the vocalist Janice Siegel, and on flute Herbie Mann, doing Gagaku and beyond. Maybe it was a bit too esoteric for Atlantic, but as we used to say, if not on Finlandar, where? And then the aforementioned Dubuffet. There's an album of Dubuffet's music, and then of course Ilhan's music for Cuckoo Bazaar, which was the exhibit at the Guggenheim. The Cuckoo Bazaar, well, the Finlandar is a veritable bazaar of delights, Turkish and others. And needless to say, the attention to packaging and cover art was exemplary. Ilhan, of course, is a hugely gifted man, we know that. He wrote books. His history of music is still mentioned by many people our age, their first encounter with this kind of work. His journals are funny and exemplary, but he's also one very fortunate man, in that he has by his side his life partner, Güngör. Güngör, a phenomenon in her own right, is a human dynamo. She's the most active of activists in all things, cultural, artistic, politics, all things Turkish. And the two of them were a virtual cultural institution. So, the Mimaroglus, they're both magnificent, and we're very fortunate to have lived and live amongst them.
I was truly honored to get to know Ilhan Mimaroglu as a young person. I'm really glad to catch history. And I'd like to thank his beloved wife, dearest Ilhan Mimaroglu, for introducing me to this unique man, this striking artist. And I'd like to share with you a poem that I've written for him. At times, when we get to hear the countdowns of our heartbeats, when the clocks just fail to mark the moments, it gets harder and harder to locate the punctuations, periods, struggling to put an end to a powerful sentence, periods struggling to define the unknown meaning of our being. Periods begin to fade away, become elusive, flow freely through our veins. Our blood, simply red, drop by drop, tend to ooze out through the cracks of existence, just to reach the closest river, just to embrace the ever-growing waves, just to ease the pain. And when the longing between the earth and men ends, when the landscape takes its eternal shape, when the tears stare the hearts at these times of timelessness, we hear a unique tune made of memories. And there stands a man with his hand on his face, playfully aware and ironically observant, taking a long drag of his toes, composing the existence with each exhale, with his subtle gaze, with his sharp words, with the unending vibration of his unforgettable spirit, courageously grasping the long-denied atonality of life, refusing the punctuations of being, and finally leaving us with the timbre of silence. Now listen. And I will try to recite a very short passage written by Ilhan Mimaroglu. He wrote these lines while he was working on his last largo. Here ends that unfinished something. Some other thing was to come before or after, maybe at the same time. The task is is to fill in what appears to be missing. Events to follow each other in a semblance of approximation. All along a figure on the rooftop blows a silent horn. The implants make the memory system disintegrate even further. Now, the whole thing is more of a puzzle. Time is no object. Try to solve the mystery or just stand by. Try to explain the night or just look the other way. Here comes the daylight. No more stars. And yet, Ilhan Mimaroglu will always remain with us. May he rest in peace.
I knew him by his writings. His book, the very first one, Art of Jazz, was a phenomenal book. It was a very right book, issued at that time for Turkish audience, because not only it was telling the story, the glorious story of art of jazz, which finally became the love of everyone all over the world. He was penetrating, he was bringing ideas, was so penetrating that I actually had to come to New York to meet him. And what he was saying, that although jazz is an improvisational art, but when you actually assemble all these characters that plays each instrument, then it becomes an art of compromise. Well, this was a very important item that he was basically indicating his own creative process, because this compromise process was in fact was a process of elimination of undesirables in the everyday life. And that's exactly why he selected to do his work at evenings where everybody went to sleep, and so the unnecessary things that had to go with them, so that he can have time for himself to create his own work. When I met him in New York, we shared the same apartment for 2 years, and it was on 111th Street. It was close enough for the Columbia Princeton Electronic Music Center at that time. Well, one other point I have to make it clear, that actually, although our routes were so different, but our purpose of coming to New York was the same, because it was a fantastic period that taking place in New York in the total arts, from plastic arts of paintings and sculptures and architecture, to music and dance, and all the creative process was enormous. And so we actually had a 2-year period of being involved in this enormous, most satisfying period where Ilhan was a working place in 5 minutes walking distance. And I look at his life and actually actually divided into two phases. Before Güngör and after Güngör. And when he went to get married, and I put them in a 110th Street hotel. I wish I had never had the chance to look at it. And it was the most miserable existence you could possibly think of. I just didn't know. I was so excited that they were coming. Because I was in 111, I wanted them to be at the 110. So, in that second period, of course, there are three phases. Colombia and Finlandia, or the Atlantic Records, and his retirement. He was actually the most generous, because most of the creative people has tendency of holding things very close to their chest, as we say. But Ilhan was most generous because his enormous knowledge could filter the process much quicker than anybody else. In that, even in that first book, and I haven't seen him in the last 2 years, but he's always in my heart, and Güngör, I'll be with you all the time. Thank you very much.
First time I met Ilhan was at the American restaurant on Broadway and 69th Street, across from the pre-war building where I lived. He was with his beloved Güngör, of course, done with his dinner and about to leave. We both knew of each other, yet I was a nobody, a kid studying at Juilliard, and Ilhan a celebrity. He told me later that he was at my New York debut, incognito, typical of him. Well, he gave me the warmest smile at the restaurant, and we spoke for the first time. He said that he would like to send me some music. Would I play it? Of course, I would have played anything he sent me. Who wouldn't? A few months later, he came up to my apartment to hear me play the music. I remember he started pacing my little studio back and forth as I was playing, but the floors creaked so much that both of us started cracking up, and he sat down. Would you like to record these? He asked. I would have recorded anything for him. Who wouldn't? So here we were, walking to the RCA Studio A, which was huge. I walked behind them, feeling dwarfed by everything surrounding me, and intimidated by this tall genius with a bass baritone voice, standing behind the glass partition, instructing everyone. Frank Bridge Sonata, take 1, take 2, insert 1, 2. His manner was so natural, so sweet, that pretty soon he made me feel right at home. And I started playing with such ease and confidence as if some magic wand touched me. That was Ilhan. His respect, his affection and passion for the music made our work and our relationship unfold beautifully over the years. Ilhan was a great listener and a brilliant conversationalist. He was a teacher, a poet, a comedian, and a man from another era. Ilhan was a prince. The artistry, the creativity, and the eccentricity of many legends all combined in one man. That was Ilhan. One time he scolded me when I I warned him about his red meat consumption. "Oh, mind the cigarettes you smoke," he said. I wanted to say, "Okay then, I'm taking away your lucky strikes," but I did not dare. Some of you may remember that in his radio show, he made fun of the movie Amadeus. Why is his middle name in the title? I will make a movie about Beethoven and call it Van. You see, he could not stand Mozart because of his predictability and popularity. He believed that contemporary music suffered in the hands of Mozart and his likes. He adored Chopin. Ilhan and Güngör once spent a night at my house in the barren South Jersey shore. "Wow," Güngör said, "I can't believe you stayed." He asked to listen to music, which he did all night long, with a sheet covering the entrance to the room, for there was no door. I always wanted to tell him how much I loved him. I didn't, but I think he knew because I lit up every time I saw him. The one last thing I want to mention is the romance of Ilhan and Güngör, which will forever touch my heart. I'm so lucky that I had a window to at least part of it. I don't honestly know any woman who loved her man as much as Güngör loved Ilhan. Just as the passage says, her love was patient and kind, not self-seeking. She protected, hoped, and trusted and always persevered. My friend, my mentor, my brother, I'm so happy that Janice and I played and sang for you a few years ago, celebrating your life. And what an honor it was to have you there across from us. You touched my life in a way no other has. I will miss you every day. Thank you for your amazing contributions to the world. I love you.
I'm so honored to be here to try to get at Ilhan's excellence with all of his excellent friends and family. My name is Julie Martin. I have known Ilhan Bey and Güngör Teyze for most of my life. They're firmly ensconced in my subconscious, to tell you the truth. I've known them that long and that fondly. My father and Ilhan worked together in the magical early days of Atlantic Records. My father, Arif Martin, went on to more commercial realm while Ilhan made incredible experimental music. Growing up in my parents' home, I would say we were lucky, my brother Joe and I, to be surrounded by all sorts of larger-than-life, true originals. And Ilhan and Güngör were definitely two of these people. Without their even knowing it, they just by their existence and the force of their special characters will influence my brother and me for the rest of our lives. Ilhan was one of the mad scientists that made Atlantic so special, and one could hear it in the work, of course, and to both of my brothers and my delight, we could experience it in just who and how he was as well. He and Bobby Warner, I'm going to steal your story, the engineer he worked with for many years, still reminisce about Ilhan's extravagant behavior in the studio. To borrow their story, it seems he liked to pace endlessly about the control room, worrying a piece of tape into a ball in between his fingers. Somebody might propose something new to him, and in my brother's words, Ilhan would just keep walking around like Aristotle, crinkling that piece of tape, until finally he would just say, "Perhaps." One of the main things I cherished about Ilhan Bey was he was probably the most unhypocritical man you would ever know. He definitely did not have a use for fakery or small talk, which was incredibly refreshing in the eyes of a young person especially. Nevertheless, if you approached him, he was so gentle and polite and full of knowledge. He probably suffered from being the most intelligent person in the room. A lot of my first impressions of him took place at my parents' parties, when all my parents' friends and colleagues from the music industry and the Turkish New Yorker community, Atatürk's children, were cavorting and having a good time. But Ilhan Bey, could it be said, he was often a bit aloof, probably why I identified with him. And he had this intense aura about him, usually all dressed in black, and whatever he said in his rapid-fire voice was refreshingly rebellious, sometimes brooding, but in the most playful and humanistic of ways. I am proud to say that I had the honor of being included in one of Ilhan Bey's writings myself. It had to do with a correspondence my father and I had about Philip Glass. My dad had taken me to see the movie Koyaanisqatsi, Afterward, it was a big film in the 80s with Philip Glass's soundtrack. Afterwards, I went back to school and sent him a postcard with the refrain, Philip Glass says hello, Philip Glass says hello, Philip Glass says hello. I think that was all there was to it. Maybe there was a variation, hello says Philip Glass. And this little fragment somehow caught Ilhan Bey's fancy, and in what could officially be called the coolest moment of, for me ever, I had the honor of being mentioned along with this anecdote in one of Ilhan Mimaroglu's columns. It's probably safe to say that both my dad and Ilhan shared a skepticism of minimalist music. They were true modernists, the two of them. Dissonance was still something which denoted angst in their music, and not just aesthetic texture. And there was still humanity and emotion present, no matter how esoteric or how electronic the composition. There is a soulfulness to Ilhan's avant-garde that I think so desperately needs to be rekindled in much of today's younger art world. Along with this, Ilhan Bey was not afraid of being political in his work at a time when I think it was not very fashionable to be so. Another example he set, which I cherish and hope we do not lose grasp of. I wish I had been able to catch up to Ilhan just sooner, but in another 20 years' time, if I'm lucky, maybe my brain will catch up to him. I thank him for being such an example of artistic and personal integrity, an example to help guide younger artists and to help me in just living my life. And thank you to Gerd as well for all the examples you've said. No matter how strong Ilhan was, you had to be 20 times stronger. Your artistry and energy and capabilities were like a safety net for both your talents and lives, all while having such maverick charm yourself. You are an inspiration to me, and you have been nothing in kindness and generosity to me. I love you and admire you both so very much. Thank you, and thank you also for the opportunity to speak.